Happy Friday the 13th. Hello, everyone. This is Steven Schinder, and you're watching Steven Schinder Reviews in video form. It's been a while since I've reviewed something, and today felt like a great occasion to try another thing. I know I'm not reviewing anything Friday the 13th related, actually. Another funny thing is today, September 13th, is also Breakaway Day within the sci-fi show Space 1999, the classic from the 70s. And so I've been listening to an audiobook called Space 1999 Armageddon Engine, or The Armageddon Engine, whichever it is. But I'm not talking about that either. I'm talking about something that predated that show by about a year. So this is something that came out September 13th, 1974, 50 years ago today. It is Planet of the Apes. Not the films, but the TV series that came out just a year after the fifth film. So, on this channel, I've reviewed the Planet of the Apes films, all 10 of them, and I've been meaning to return to talking about Planet of the Apes, the franchise, for a while. I've had ideas here and there, and it seemed like a good time. Apparently, YouTube has the, they have the rights to have the telefilms of the TV show, or most of them anyway, at least. I'd have to check again. But yeah, so to back up, this show aired for just one season. So it started in 1974, and then in 1980, I believe, is when some episodes were re-aired as telefilms, which meant that they would stitch together like two episodes and air them as an hour and a half long film, basically. So it's like two episodes back to back, no end credits in the middle, and they just, it just kind of plays as one thing. I assume there are probably commercials, but on YouTube, you can watch uh, the some of these telefilms at least. The first of these was Back to the Planet of the Apes. Kind of an odd title given the premise of the episodes. So this one includes the first episode, Escape from Tomorrow, and the third episode, The Trap. And that might sound really strange, but this show really is episodic. I've watched this show a while ago, and now the telefilms are, I guess, are kind of a new way for me to experience them. I'm still figuring out how I'm gonna review this show. If I'm gonna watch the other telefilms are available, maybe talk about other episodes, even if they're not telefilms. But yeah, this seemed like a good time. Back to the Planet of the Apes. I'm back to talking about this franchise. But yeah, it's kind of a strange title because it's not connected to the films, at least not explicitly. Although I do like to headcanon that it does take place, prior to the original film. So in the opening intro to this, we see that a few astronauts go from the year 1980 to the year 3085, and that's 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years, maybe 900 before when the first Planet of the Apes film takes place, and it begins with an ape who has a dog, and the dog's barking at a human. The ape, I think it was a chimp. He says it's just a human, and as we know from the Planet of the Apes films, the fourth one, or I think the third one as well, mentioned a timeline where there was this plague that wiped out cats and dogs. And so I always took that to mean that when Cornelius and Zira go back in time and escape from the Planet of the Apes, they create a new timeline. So I kind of like to look at this TV show as being part of the original timeline prior to the original film, if that makes sense. I've talked a bit about the time travel stuff in reviewing the classic films, maybe even to the detriment of those reviews, because afterward I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not sure that it was so good to spend so much time on that when there's like other stuff to take into account with that. sort of topic, and debates back and forth about whether there are multiple timelines. But same timeline or different timeline, whatever. The show, it kind of stands on its own. It begins with these astronauts. They crash land on the Planet of the Apes, and of course, it goes through some similar emotions as the original film. One of the astronauts, Jonesy, dies. The other two, who are our main characters for this show, Alan Verdon and Peter Burke, not to be confused with Peter Burke from the USA show White Collar, uh, they believe that they are on another planet and they are found by another human. And the humans in this show are able to talk. And this never bothered me because, in headcanoning that this is 1,000 years prior to the original film, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is before the humans lost the ability to talk. And they're subservient to the apes. And I would infer that, like, over time, they lose the ability to speak, and some of this knowledge is lost even further. Even in this particular time period, the apes do not believe that humans were capable of being dominant, really. Um, and there's this strange sort of backstory. Like, you have some apes, like Counselor Zaius, who I like to pretend or assume is the ancestor of Dr. Zaius. He mentions astronauts who had previously crash landed and were dealt with, and General Urko, played by Mark Leonard, who played Sarek in Star Trek. I know, isn't that wild? Urko had killed those previous astronauts from 10 years prior, and it kind of feels like this is trying to, if you're sort of watching and thinking in broad strokes, I could see how one would think, oh, this is supposed to take place after the original film, like 10 years later, ignoring what happens at the end of Beneath, I guess. But it also kind of feels like it maybe references events of an earlier version of what the first episode would have been. I heard that Rod Serling was originally attached to the first episode, and some of the character names I think might have been similar to character names from an earlier draft of the first Planet of the Apes film. If I recall correctly, one of the short stories in Tales from the Forbidden Zone, a short story collection, even tried to tie those two different versions slash stories, the Rod Serling type story with those other characters, to this idea of like the previous astronauts within the context of this show. So it's an interesting idea. Kind of weird if you're just watching the TV show and you're like, whoa, what's this thing? What's this backstory that they're referencing? I can see how it's kind of confusing, but yeah, so astronauts had previously crash landed on the Planet of the Apes and were killed by General Urko, and now Zaius wants these new astronauts to be taken in alive for questioning, and they're wary of the status quo being broken and whatnot. So the human from this time period who brings Peter and Alan, the astronauts, he takes them into this cave type place, and there they discover like this book, and this is like after they look at the outside and are like, oh, this could have been worse, type place. And this book shows a city from human civilization in the year 2503, I think it was. Or was it 2503 or 2103? I think it was 2503. So that kind of like feeds into my idea that, oh, maybe this is in the original timeline. Maybe, an ape named Aldo rose up like sometime after that year in this timeline. But again, that's getting into like the nitty gritty of possibilities and chronology and stuff like that. It's not really relevant to the show, but yeah, in this show, there have been maybe just half a millennia at most of apes being dominant. So it's interesting some of the differences here and what we see in the other films and whatnot. So yeah, they're shocked that they are far from home, from all the people that they love back in their own time period. And they are fugitives. They're being hunted by the apes, with their guns and whatnot. If it were me, I would have titled this TV show Fugitives of the Planet of the Apes, or Fugitives on the Planet of the Apes. So it's not just Planet of the Apes again, but yeah, and in the telefilm version, like I said, that combines this first episode and the third episode. It's called Back to the Planet of the Apes, which doesn't make sense because these characters have not been in the ape world, the ape time period before. But I guess he could argue that they were on this planet Earth and then they came back, and it just so happens that when they came back, it's the Planet of the Apes. And then they get this device from their ship. They have to do some sneaking around. It's like this computer type thing, this little device that's supposed to help them figure out how to get home. Like, I think they're supposed to put it in some sort of working spacecraft, and it could somehow get them. Maybe they could find a wormhole and go back to their own time or something. But yeah, they get the help of a chimp named Galen, who was played by Roddy McDowall, who played Cornelius and Caesar in the original 5 films. Well, he was absent for the second one, but appears in narration, so whatever. So really cool that they were able to get Roddy McDowall to be part of this. In a way, it kind of legitimizes it a bit more, and I kind of like to imagine that Galen is an ancestor of Cornelius, whether intended or not. But yeah, he goes on the run with them. He becomes friends with them. When he's flipping through the book and he sees like evidence of apes used to be in zoos run by humans. I was kind of wondering to myself, did Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes take a bit of inspiration from this, or is it just a coincidence? Because that type of thing, apes being in zoos, it's kind of a common thing to a common idea to come across. So maybe they could have come to that independently, but it'd be an interesting pull if that was sort of inspired by this episode, as well as something in the next one that's within this telefilm. So, like I said, in this first episode, they're on the run. The show is pretty episodic, so the order kind of doesn't really matter from what I could remember. I do remember in the second episode, they look at the little metal device that is supposed to help them get home, and then after that, just never appears again. Like, I guess the creatives were like, "Oh, we don't need it," and just like ditched it or whatever. Which, I mean, if this were being made today, like, you could not get away with that. But yeah, this telefilm just goes to the third episode, which is titled "The Trap." And I think there was like an earthquake. I've been watching, like, I watched some other show that involved an earthquake, and there was also an earthquake around here this week. It's really strange, like the coincidences and stuff. But Peter and Urko end up like trapped underground in this subway tunnel, and so Alan, Galen, and they have to team up with another ape or a couple other apes because they want to save Urko, they want to save Peter, and this predates Enemy Mine, the novella and film. Was it film? It had some sort of adaptation. I've never seen it, but I just know that it sort of popularized or repopularized that idea of two enemies trapped somewhere and they have to work together. And this episode predates that, interestingly enough. So Urko and Peter in the subway tunnel, and Peter is trying to convince Urko of like humans having used to be dominant, and there's all this evidence within the tunnel that he's trying to explain to him, but Urko's not willing to listen, and he almost, he wants to kill Peter, and so Peter, out of desperation, says, I was lying, and, so that he could save his own life, and they can work together. So they agree to work together, but eventually Urko does see a poster of I think it's another poster advertising a zoo with like a gorilla, a depiction of a gorilla like behind bars and whatnot. So again, I do kind of wonder if this stuff could have inspired a little bit of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. But yeah, so when Urko finds that, he gets really upset and is like, how much have you been lying to me?" That type of thing. And it's like, man, Urko is in denial about everything, and when he's faced with the truth, he like gets super upset. It's like this guy's all over the place. But eventually they get out, and Peter does knock out Urko by, I think he almost stabs Peter with a knife, and it gets into this electric bulb thing, and it shocks him, like so he's unconscious. But Urko and Peter are saved. Peter's reunited with Alan and Galen, and this other gorilla decides to let them go, out of honor and whatnot. And as they escape, they also have horses that they managed to get in the first episode, and horses are a thing like in this show as well. Continuing that whole motif. I think they lose them in this one. I don't remember, but and I just watched it like a bit ago, but yeah, like they go on the run again, and the other guerrilla forces on horses, they show up, and this gorilla who let them go, he finds the poster that Urko had found and looks at it, and he's like visibly upset and like tears it up. It's like, man, the apes are in such denial of any anything that would shake their world, apart from this earthquake, I guess. Anything that would change what they know is so earth-shattering that they just don't want to deal with it. They just are committed to what they were taught to believe, even though it's not the truth, that they were always dominant. And it's just, yeah, so this show, it continues some of those themes. I can see though how it might not be considered as strong as the films, or most of the films. You get some of the similar ideas. The pacing, I can see how it kind of gets dragged out a bit. Each episode is 45 minutes. Um, and some of that could be condensed here and there. There might be moments where it feels like they're padding the runtime, but I do like these characters. I just wish that this show had been less episodic. I feel like though these two episodes, the ones chosen for this telefilm, the first episode and the third episode, they really are two of the more memorable episodes, and solid performances, and just the memorable moments of, like, whenever they're confronted with this possibility of what the past actually was. And it's just, yeah, so overall I think I'd give each episode, as well as this telefilm they got edited into, maybe a 7.5 at best. It's kind of comfort food. It does make you think a bit, but maybe is not as bold and daring as the films are. But I quite like the, costume, makeup, all that, the world building. Um, and yeah, I guess it's kind of a comfort food show in a way. It's very episodic, not as serialized as other shows. They're on the run, and they like go from one problem to the next, and yeah, it doesn't have a concrete direction like some other shows would. But yeah, so that's my review of Back to the Planet of the Apes, and by extension, the first and third episodes, Escape from Tomorrow and The Trap. Kind of weird that they call the first episode Escape from Tomorrow when they don't escape from the future at all in that episode. But yeah, I don't know if I like maybe skipped over details here and there, but I'm trying not to, do play by play recap, just talking about the stuff that stood out to me. So I might continue talking about these telefilms, see which ones are also available on YouTube, and uh, maybe talk about other episodes as well. Uh, yeah, and we'll see like how frequently I'm able to do that. My schedule is really busy. I've had to do a bunch of things, lots of things to work on. So I kind of want to do all these within September because you get to October, you're like, oh, it's got to be like something scary or horror related, quote unquote. But I don't know, just taking it one thing at a time, and things will go up whenever they go up on the channel. Steven Shinder reviews in video form. So, with that, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you all next time.